Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're focusing really specifically on understanding a viewpoint from source material you've shared. It touches on Russian politics, ideology, but our job isn't to judge it or give you the whole picture.
No, not at all.
We're just extracting the key claims and the examples from these texts to show you this particular viewpoint. Think of us as guides for this specific perspective.
And what jumps out right away is, well, a pretty provocative central claim in this source.
It really does dive right in.
Yeah.
The source asserts that something it calls cretinism has become the official state ideology of the Russian Federation. That's certainly strong wording from the source authors.
Yeah, and according to this viewpoint, it's not just, incompetence happening by chance.
Right.
It argues that any real thought, any logic or reason is actually viewed negatively, actively so.
How negatively?
The source describes it as being seen almost like treason to the motherland or even labeled extremism.
So the argument presented here is a kind of deliberate inversion. Thinking is bad, logic is subversive.
Exactly. And this state of mental decadence and degradation, as the source puts it, it claims it's not an accident.
Okay, so deliberately maintained.
That's the claim. Deliberately maintained because, in the view presented in this text, everything will collapse otherwise.
The implication being that rational thought is perceived as a threat to the system itself, according to this source.
Precisely. That's the core of the argument laid out here.
And the source adds another layer, almost a procedural one. It claims it's actually a duty for officials at all levels.
A duty.
Yeah, a duty to make what the source calls absurd statements. Weekly, it says.
Wow. Okay, so not just slips of the tongue, but required absurdity.
According to this source, yes, a mechanism to actively support this alleged ideological state. A required performance, as this viewpoint describes it.
Interesting. And I assume the source provides examples.
It does. This is where it tries to get concrete. It points to Volodin, Chairman of the State Duma.
Ah, Volodin. Yeah.
The source uses statements attributed to him as evidence for its broader claims about this alleged ideology.
Right, presenting him as a sort of case study for this required absurdity.
Exactly. And it details several specific things reportedly said by Volodin, according to this source material.
Such as?
Well, for one, it claims Volodin described defensive actions by a country resisting occupation and genocide as terrorism and banditism.
So using that attribution to highlight the alleged distortion of language.
Yes. And the source goes further, attributing an even more jarring statement to Volodin.
Okay.
Claiming this resistance is framed as interfering with a, quote, sacred right of Russians to rob and kill. That's a direct quote from the source about Volodin's alleged statement.
Right. A very extreme claim presented by the source to underscore its point about inverted values and official rhetoric.
The source also mentions Volodin reportedly saying European parliaments need to recognize responsibility for Ukraine's actions.
Another example they use.
And one more the source includes. Volodin apparently describing Ukraine's leader as an expired bar of soap.
An expired bar of soap.
Yes, who, according to this attributed quote, doesn't want peace, but just wants to stay in power.
Okay, so those are the key examples the source uses to back up its central thesis about Volodin.
Right, so if we just look at the source material we've been discussing, its perspective is this. A controversial claim about a deliberate state ideology of absurdity or mental degradation.
Maintained, it argues, because rational thought is seen as destabilizing.
And reinforced, supposedly, by officials having to make these absurd statements regularly, with Volodin's attributed remarks presented as key evidence.
Yeah, the viewpoint presented is that the rhetoric isn't accidental, it's calculated within the system this source describes.
So that brings us to a final thought for you, based only on the perspective in this source material we've just explored. If, as this source contends, there's a calculated effort to foster mental degradation and absurdity through required rhetoric, what might this specific viewpoint suggest about the nature of power and who the intended audience really is for the political language it describes? Something for you to mull over.